Hey friends, it's me again. Happy 2021, Happy New Year. I'm Kevin Ozar. This is my frequently infrequent podcast slash YouTube program. We're beyond labels. This is not a snow day. It is January 4th that I'm recording this here in southeastern Michigan, 35 degrees and cloudy, which means it is not that nice that you want to be outside, but it's too warm to freeze a giant ice rink. If you've maybe made one in your backyard, maybe that's you. Maybe not. Maybe it should be you. Thank you so much for joining me. It's 2021. Redid The Office, new paint, same art. I did a couple projects, and today was the first day that we went back to school, still virtual, with a looming decision probably on the 25th when the semester would change that we are going to go back to face-to-face. And I feel like today is a great day to talk a little bit about school because it seems like there's a lot of conversation among friends, among people who used to be friends but now just yell at each other on Facebook. And it all kind of has to do with this idea that my kid is behind. The children are behind. What about the children? Clutch pearls, faint on the divan. The kids are not behind. They're not behind. And as an educator with approximately 25 years of experience, I'm going to try to tell you why our kids are not behind. And maybe this will help you feel better. Maybe it will confirm what you already feel. Or maybe this will give you exactly the points you need to talk to Aunt Karen on Facebook and tell her why she should quit posting some of the things that she's posting. Okay, so here we go. Number one, reason why kids aren't behind. Because the kids aren't behind because the point of education is not to get ahead of everybody else. Learning is not a competition. You don't win at learning. And the entire idea of ahead or behind implies that some people are more and some people are less, and the people who are more are better. So just slow down here. Plutarch, the philosopher, said that learning is not a bucket to be filled, it's a fire that should be encouraged and fed. That's a much more accurate idea of what real learning is. I want you to think about anything you've ever learned in your life, from how to tie your shoes, to how to do cross stitch, to how to bake that pineapple upside down cake just perfectly so the slices come out of the pan beautifully. It probably took some trial and error, and the age that you learned it doesn't make you right or wrong. So why can't we apply that to school? Well, there's a reason we don't apply that to school. It's because there's a bunch of people making a bunch of money, giving our kids a bunch of tests that they don't really need, and then measuring them in percentiles based on other kids. So when we look at standardized tests, it's often like, well, relative to their peers, well, that sets up competition. On top of that, we are a capitalist society, which is completely infatuated with the accumulation of wealth. And when you lay that cultural norm on top of what we've been doing with testing, we get this mindset that our kids need to be better than everyone else or else they're losing. That my kid's a loser because they're not ahead of everyone else in learning. When in reality, learning is a lifelong pursuit that never stops. And that's also something that's happened in our society. Is we think like, oh no, I went to school, I'm done, and I'm all set. Now I'm going to be static and just compete for dollars. Learning is ongoing. And the idea that you would win at it implies there's a finish line for learning. And that's really not what education is all about. So the entire conversation is kind of ridiculous, in my opinion. However, there are people who really appreciate those standards and want to see where their kids are on a chart. And I certainly look at my kids' test results, both my students and my children. So let's look at this a little differently. Every single year, when kids walk into a classroom, every single one of those kids is at a completely different place. I have never in my career, whether I was teaching seniors who have all gone through the exact same 12-year sequence, or I was teaching sixth graders who are coming from a dozen different middle schools, I have never, ever had every kid walk in the door like we are all at 3.7. Let us now go to 3.8. That's not how the brain works. That's not how learning operates. So the idea that kids are now going to be going into classrooms and going to schools at different places than each other is 100% normal. That's what makes teachers magicians and wizards and air traffic controllers all at the same time. is because they manage all that different learning and move everyone forward. And if you look at the way educators look at growth, data, they don't look at did everyone meet the thing, did they get to the point? Educators, true educators, look at did everybody grow? Did we get a year's worth of growth in a year's worth of time? That's a true metric to measure learning. So the kids are going to grow and they'll continue to grow and hopefully be a lifelong learner. So there's no idea you could be behind on growing. You just haven't gotten there yet. So that's another point. So every time a kid walks into a school, they need to be at a different place because they're unique individuals, and the teachers will do this, which means no matter what classrooms look like next week or next year, educators, professional educators have long been taking a bunch of people in different places and moving them all forward. That's what teachers do. So this idea that the kids are going to be in a bad spot, that's just silly. Number 3, we're all going through this. This isn't a regional pandemic. This isn't a subdivision pandemic. This is a global pandemic. And we are going to see that education is going to shift in a lot of different ways to help meet these kids where they are and move them forward. So while there may be this perception of behind, certainly educators are adjusting the whole time. Point number 4, those standards that people say that kids aren't meeting, that they're behind. Here's the deal. I've been on like a dozen committees where a bunch of teachers sit together and decide what those standards are. I've worked at the state level and at the district level. And honestly, if we're working on a standard and lunch is coming up, we're going to rush right through that one. And we'll say, yeah, that's good for this year, because that's what everybody does. And then we revisit it each year and adjust and tweak. It is not like these were written in some tablet and handed down from a talking shrubbery somewhere, or a tablet that was unearthed. This is not religious fixed text. This is a flowing dynamic document, which is constantly shifting. The standards that I try to get my students to each year are different than they were 2-3 years ago, and are certainly different than 17 years ago when I moved to high school, and 23 years ago when I started education in a classroom of my own. Those standards aren't fixed. They're not cement benchmarks. Number 5. There is some validity to people being emotionally behind, but that's absurd to say. So let's talk about what it really means. Kids are not experiencing some socialization that they normally get in schools. What I would argue is the most important part of schools is learning to be a citizen, a human around other citizens. That's not happening. That's 100% true. And that usually happens at school, the emotional and social stuff. So there are some pieces that our kids are missing, and we're going to be really attuned to that. But you can't really be like behind on socialization. You just haven't had that experience yet. And whether you first experienced a different culture at 5 or at 15 or at 50, you know that you will gain a lot from that experience and then grow from there. And so our kids are going to grow from those experiences when they have them. Are they perhaps feeling isolated or lonely or sad? Some of them, yeah. Are some of them feeling super safe and focused because they get to do things their way and they don't have to be in a big crowd of people, which isn't their comfort zone? Yeah, some kids are really digging that. Now, this is an interesting one because if we push on the emotional element, oh, our kids are sad because they're not in school, oh, the social element, then what we're doing is saying that schools are not just responsible for our kids' cognition, but they're also responsible for their learning, and they're also responsible for their social, and they're also responsible for their emotional. That seems like a lot on an institution that keeps getting defunded. So really, if right now we're saying that schools are responsible for every kid's emotional well-being and social well-being as well as their academic progress, then I think we really ought to look at our resource allotment, because I think you're putting too much on one plate. And I think we put a lot on educators' plate, so maybe we need to look at how vital they are coming out of this and how we can say, okay, now that we know what they really do, now that we really know what we rely on this institution, education, for, then maybe that's something we should reevaluate to put them in a place to be successful, pandemic or not. Number 6, the reason kids are not behind, and maybe I should have led with this one. This is the one I feel like you might want to share with somebody else on your Facebook wall. This holiday season, my family was pretty strict about social distancing. And so we experienced a lot of our family gatherings on electronic platforms, on Zoom, on Google Meet, on FaceTime. You know how I know that kids aren't behind? Is because I've watched 6-year-olds and 10-year-olds with perfect clarity and precision explain to adults how to operate technology in a calm, rational way that most adults are like screaming, no, it's in the left, it's a left, it's a left, you're on mute. Grandpa, you're on mute. Grandpa. That doesn't help anyone. But you watch a 10-year-old who's been going to class and they're gonna say, okay, please look at the instructions I just put in the chat. The chat is to the left. Okay, now Grandpa, listen, if you scroll down, there's a picture of a microphone. It looks like an ice cream cone. If you click on that just one time, let's see what happens. And the kid knew the platform, and the kid also knew the language and the patience and the waiting and how to solve it, and knew to put the directions in the chat before we all just started yelling at an octogenarian who just wanted to tell how much he appreciated his new socks. That's a skill that most adults don't have. And so, are we saying our kids are behind in becoming replicants of us for a generation that's pretty much passed? Or are we noticing that our kids are way behind in skills that we don't have and couldn't even conceive of because we've never lived through something like this? I mean, I think the kids are all right. I think the kids are going to be all right. And I think they've got some amazing new skills that we don't have, that we didn't need, but they will need and will use in the 21st century workplace, which is going to be largely online because of the thing they just went through, making them adaptable, making them learning, making them perhaps ahead. So that's my reasons why kids aren't behind, why kids are doing great. There's one last one. If you really want to mix it up, if you really want to dump some kerosene on a Facebook group, when someone says the kids are behind, ask them, what standard do you mean? Which benchmark is your student not achieving? Because every single person I've talked to who's not an educator can't actually articulate what they think their kids are behind. They just have this looming fear that their kids aren't going to win. And that's not really what education's about. And that's, for me, not what parenting's about. It's not what living's about. And so if you can help people drill down into what they're really afraid about, you can actually get to the secondary real conversation and get away from the posturing and positing and nonsense that I think some people are buying into. Not because they're bad people. I think people care very much about their children and want what's best for them. But best is an interesting word. I think what we need is what's going to be good for all kids moving forward, that's going to be good for all society moving forward. And I think the educators are probably going to handle this pretty well because the kids are handling it really well right now with the guidance from some great educators and some awesome supportive parents. So that's why I think the kids aren't behind. I want to try and do it in 6 minutes, came out at 13. That's on brand for me. I'm okay with it. This is one I'd really like for you to share because everyone I've told these points to in conversation or on text message, they were like, yeah, I feel a lot better. So if this can help some people feel better, please share. You can always subscribe down below. Click on that subscribe. You can give it a thumbs up. I'd love some comments as well if you'd like it. But pass this one around because I think it's going to help people feel better as we transition back to whatever school's going to be for a little while. So thanks. Nobody's behind. We're all just doing our best today, and we'll do our best tomorrow, and pretty soon we'll all be all right because the kids are going to show us the way. This is Not a Snow Day. I'm Kevin Ozar. Thanks for watching. Be well.